Welcome, my friends, to the very first episode of Heresy Reignited, a series where we dive deep into alternative histories, critical analysis, and retrospective perspectives on the Horus Heresy and beyond, i.e. the 40k setting. Today's topic is going to be how self-doubt cost chaos the war. Here's the hook, okay? What if Lorgar had led the heresy from the very beginning? I firmly believe that if Lorgar had possessed the confidence to lead his brothers either to their deaths or to their damnation, then chaos may very well have triumphed in the war that split the galaxy in two. And here are the three major points to frame this argument. 1. Horus as Warmaster embodied self-doubt and masqueraded as confidence. I think that there's multiple times throughout the books where we can look at Horus where he wasn't the most confident in himself, but his legion was utterly confident in him. 2, the heresy was executed under a ticking clock. And 3, the entire structure of the betrayal, the how, was flawed. So without further delay, let's dive into the psyche of Horus Lupercal. Now, I'll be the first to admit that the Sons of Horus are, without a doubt, my favorite legion. I'm obsessed with their colors, and I absolutely am addicted to painting them. But despite that affection, I'll say something controversial. I believe Horus is overrated. A good chunk of the Primarchs, in my opinion, are overrated. I like the Marines, I like their captains, but the Primarchs, I paint them, but I don't really like fielding them a whole lot. Now, let's start from the beginning. Prior to becoming Warmaster, Horus was a phenomenal leader. A bit arrogant, sure, overconfident, absolutely, but his leadership of the Luna Wolves was efficient, bold, and highly successful. He was adaptable, capable of implementing his brother's own strategy, as well as coming up with the infamous spear tip assault doctrine. However, things started to unravel when he was named Warmaster. We get a clear glimpse into Horus's fragile mindset in Fear to Tread, in a chapter recounting his coronation at Ulanor, and I believe the chapter was just called Ulanor. Horus confides in his brother Sanguinius, and when Sanguinius calls him Warmaster, Horus responds, "Shall I grow to fit it?" To which Sanguinius replies, "It will grow to fit you, and you will wear it well." Horus then admits, "When I seek words to express my intent, I have to dig for them, measure them, and cut them to size. You are effortless with it." This exchange highlights a core issue, and again, I'm paraphrasing the chapter here. It's a couple quotes, but Horus didn't really believe in his own worth, and he's confiding this in Sanguinius. He was trying to live up to an ideal that he didn't think he embodied, instead of really focusing on why the Emperor chose him as Warmaster. So instead of fixating on the good, he instead fixated on everything he lacked, almost setting like the Emperor on this massive pedestal and himself humbly just falling short in a lot of aspects. And this wasn't just something he did with his brother Sanguinius, but with all the other Primarchs he felt were a threat. Obviously, naturally, I don't think he ever looked at Mortarion or Angron or even Petrarabo with that type. I would even say he wouldn't have even really included Dorn in that. But brothers like Guilliman, the Lion, and Sanguinius, I think he definitely was a little bit threatened by, because they possessed the aspect that he himself did not. And rather than looking at that and saying, well, I have other aspects and attributes that I can take to this position that they don't, he instead looked at that like, I don't have this and I fall short. Now, again, this exchange really highlights a core issue. Horus really didn't believe in his own worth. He was trying to live up to this ideal, right? And there's another great moment in Horus Rising, after Loken executes Xavier Jubal for turning into this giant possessed marine. Horus asks him, "Do you know why the Emperor appointed me as Warmaster?" To which Loken answers, "Because you are the most worthy, sir." Horus just laughs and replies, "I am Warmaster because the Emperor is busy." And he was talking, of course, about the warp. But that line seemed a little bit humble, but if you put it into context, it reveals kind of a deep insecurity. He wasn't confident in his appointment. Even though Loken utterly was, he was not. And this doubt keeps resurfacing across the entire series. I would say, again, after the battle with the Mega Arachnids, where they just were about to completely wipe him out and the Interrex came, right? During a meeting with the Mournival, Horus is hesitant to kind of act on the Interrex. He knows that the Emperor doesn't want anything to do with people or humans that work alongside aliens, and the Interrex worked with the Kinnenbrock, which kind of mixed their cultures together to kind of form this semi-livable empire, I would say. And in this kind of scene, Horus is reflecting on a ring the Emperor gave him, and a conversation he had with him upon, I think, around being found and going through some of the constellations. And the Emperor tells Horus, "Make no mistakes, and the galaxy will be ours." But here's the kicker. Horus already believes at this point in time in the book that he's already made two major mistakes. One was his attack on Terra, not real Terra, but fake Terra, Terra 2.0, in the beginning of Horus Rising, where he lost Hester Serjanus, one of his homies in the Mournival, but also like a really close confidant. And the second was when he misunderstood the beacons that were warning them away from wiping out the mega arachnids, and he just completely unleashed war. And the Interrex really kind of called to question maybe the Emperor's plan of maybe we don't have to wipe out everyone that doesn't live exactly like us. There's openings and gaps that can be made. However, as we would go on in the book, we'd see that the negotiations with the Interrex would collapse, and Erebus, a member of the Word Bearers, would have a sabotage. He would go and destroy the Hall of Devices and steal an anathema blade, a blade where if you muttered a name to it, it would go out of its way and become his anathema. Now, Horus is really shattered when he finds out about this. He goes to the Hall of Devices and breaks down. Kind of when he realizes war is almost imminent, he breaks down and says, "Why have you tasked me with this, Father? Why have you forsaken me? Why? It is too much. It is too hard. Why have you done this to me?" And he says it with an earshot of Garviel Loken. But where I believe there's a little bit of a difference here is that when battle becomes inevitable, he shouts to the Interrex, "In the name of the Emperor of mankind, I demand to speak to Naud." But when fire is returned and two Astartes go down, one being wounded, the other one being killed, Horus lashes out and he yells, "Their mistake. Their damn mistake. If they're going to fear us, let us give them good reason. For the Emperor, illuminate them." And I included this because we're going to bring this up a little bit later when we dive into maybe Lorgar here. Now, this moment is crucial because he doubts himself, even voices that doubt aloud. But he still tries to become the son his father needs him to be. He suppresses his insecurity and buries it just in this righteous fury. But this very insecurity that we do have is why Horus was the wrong choice to lead the heresy. He suffers more from self-doubt than perhaps, I would say, almost any other Primarch except Lorgar. And that brings us to pivot onto Lorgar. Lorgar's decision to elevate Horus as Arch-Traitor stemmed from his own inadequacy, right? He saw in Horus the strength and the presence he lacked. Instead of leading, Lorgar chose to influence. He sent Argel Tal into the warp rather than going himself in the beginning. And that's something he really reflects on in Betrayer to Magnus about one of his greatest mistakes was sending Argel Tal ahead of himself, for he paid for it so, and it should have been his burden. But he was kind of a pansy and didn't do it, right? And unfortunately, this is something that Lorgar has to live with. But because of this hesitation, he missed a major opportunity, I think, for character development. Now, by the time we get to Slaves to Darkness, we see a very different Lorgar. One who believes he should be leading the heresy, and I agree. If he had stayed with the Great Crusade a little longer and pretended to be in service to the Emperor, he could have sowed more doubt amongst his brothers and their ranks, manipulating events, and with patience and subtlety, I believe Lorgar could have turned Angron, Perturabo, Fulgrim, and even Mortarion. Let's think about it a little bit here. Angron already hated the Emperor for him pulling him out of New Syria before his giant battle against the slave owners, right? Perturabo always kind of went around feeling unappreciated, and that was one of the reasons why he joined Horus. Actually, both those are reasons why they joined Horus. Fulgrim was already corrupted with the Laren Blade, reason we'll go into a little bit later that I think was a big... Obviously, the Laren Blade was a big factor in why Fulgrim fell, but also his own pride. And then Mortarion low psychers, and I think he could have been persuaded through ideological framing by Lorgar to betray the Emperor. And that kind of brings me to Horus, right? The Arch-Traitor himself. I don't believe he would have turned without Erebus and the anathema. The quote for the Emperor was sincere when he was going against the Interrex. And if Lorgar had tried to outmaneuver Horus instead of elevating him to the Arch-Traitor, I believe Horus would have remained loyal. He would never have served under Lorgar. He had a very low opinion of him. And I think even in the end, he would have still stayed loyal to the Emperor over betraying and going under Lorgar's wing. Now, even if Horus had gone down this path, I still think Lorgar could have had him killed off with the anathema, and that would have done more damage to the Sons of Horus and likely caused a collapse and schism than if Horus had just survived like he did. Their loyalty to Lupercal was absolute, but with that collapse, it would have fractured them. It would have made them a little bit less motivated. They wouldn't have had that crux, that belief in themselves, because Horus Lupercal, the Warmaster, the one favored above all, had fallen in combat. And it would have given them almost a sense of their own morality. And even if they had chosen to side with the Emperor against Lorgar, they would be broken. There wouldn't be much of Sons of Horus really left to worry about. But instead of all this, we get Horus's betrayal, and it became pretty sloppy and false gods. His war on the technocracy was already drawing attention from the Emperor, which, in point, is why Fulgrim even talked to Horus in the first place. Fulgrim kind of went to go have this conversation with Horus, and right as it was getting to that point, one of his, I think, was it Marine or servant, brought him the Laren blade, and then all of a sudden he became washed over with being a heretic, right? It was a little tacky, I'm not going to lie. You can read about it in Fulgrim, I believe. And it was just a very unique point. However, through some convincing, and Horus gives, Fulgrim the Anathame blade and kind of lets him in on his plans. Of course, Fulgrim goes with it. He's already being corrupted by this blade anyways. Now, later in Galaxy in Flames, they will have a slew of just mistakes in the opening of the betrayal. This whole thing that Horus is gearing up for, to betray the Emperor himself. And he's already messing it up pretty freaking bad. So let's dive into what that looks like in Galaxy in Flames. Garo is able to escape on the flight of the Eisenstein and bring word to Dorn of Horus's betrayal and the other Primarchs. And two, the biggest one that really leads, and I think robbed Horus of any credibility with me, was when Angron would make planetfall to kill the rest of the Loyalists. Now, Horus's lack of control and allowing Angron to go rogue, even when Abaddon suggested bombing him, shows, I think, Horus's refusal to really double down and be the ultimate D-bag that needed to be done. Instead, he would allow all the legions to make planetfall. They would lose half of the World Eaters. They would lose a good chunk of Emperor's Children, Death Guard, and Sons of Horus, just in Isstvan 3 alone, before they're even fighting the Emperor's forces. And I think if it wasn't for such a betrayal at Isstvan 5 with the other legions under his banner, there would have already been huge setbacks in Horus's betrayal. Now, had Lorgar taken the reins as Arch-Traitor, he could have manipulated the Blood Angels with their Black Rage and kind of caused schisms within their legion. He could have caused infighting. There was already a lot of that there in Fear to Tread when they go to Cygnus. And I still think he could have had Sanguinius either wiped out or he would have stayed loyal. I don't know if Sanguinius would have really fully turned, to be honest with you. But one thing that I think I should know is Horus didn't really send Sanguinius to Cygnus for him to betray and turn to a traitor. Horus was always a little bit of intimidated by Sanguinius, and I think that he feared if Erebus's plan had worked and Sanguinius had turned traitor, it would have given him a run for money in Warmaster, his insecurities again showing through. So rather than that, he sets up with Kabanda and sets a deal in motion to take out Sanguinius rather than work on turning him. And I think that if Lorgar would have had the confidence in himself to lead the heresy, I think we could have either seen him pull Sanguinius, big if, but I think we would have seen him definitely fracture the Blood Angels and get more legionaries on his side. The second thing he could have done was he could have coordinated with Luther from the Dark Angels to really mess up Lionel Johnson, rather than having the Night Lords play cat and mouse throughout the entire heresy and the Thramis Crusade and all that nonsense. He could have had the Night Lords maybe lure them into Luther and then just pick the whole Legion apart, and that would have been the end of the First Legion. 3, he could have orchestrated still the destruction of the Ultramarines and the 500 worlds. He could have still sacrificed all the suffering between that and purging any loyalist elements from the legions, and still caused the Ruinous Storm. So, I mean, he was really already the crux for the Ruinous Storm, him and his legion, where Horus didn't really do a whole lot to bring that about. And all the other legions kind of getting scattered. It wouldn't have mattered if he pushed the White Scars or anyone else to the fringes. He could have just sowed discontent and rancor and just started turning the hearts of the brothers. And the biggest thing that would have been on Lorgar's side is there wouldn't have been this time frame, because the Eisenstein wouldn't have gotten off to the Emperor. There would have been a lot more rancor and discontent throughout every legion instead of just a few. And it would have really, I think, made a more pivotal role for Lorgar as the Warmaster to kind of set things up to where he would have won. Now, another thing that I think is really underrated is Lorgar had already had a massive understanding of chaos, right? Where Horus was still kind of feeling it out as we go. Like, it wasn't until False Gods, I think, he sacrificed in Mang Sang and talked to the demons, and he still denied their help for Isfahan 3. He thought that was a Legion matter. Erebus had already had a decent understanding of chaos. He didn't need to pledge his soul blindly like maybe Horus did, and he knew that the Pantheon was there and how to wield its power, almost like how Abaddon does in 40k. He could have been the ultimate villain and the arch-heretic himself, and I believe, personally, it would have been a poetic counterpoint to the Emperor's greatest mistake, which is Monarchia. So, for those that maybe aren't as familiar, I have a few people that watch this that aren't into the Warhammer stuff. Monarchia was the capital city of the Word Bearers, and because they were trying to convert other planets and people over to worshiping the Emperor as a god, rather than raising them into a secular civilization and getting rid of religion, this really kind of rubbed the Emperor the wrong way. One, because there is Uriah Alether, the last priest on Terra, who warned him, be careful that, others don't mistake you for a god. And here's his own son writing a religion all about the Emperor and then converting people, which was everything the Emperor stood completely against. So I think that when he went to raise Monarchia, he forced the Word Bearers to kneel through, I think some psychic restraint, and kneel they did. And he treated them like he was like, you want to worship me as a god? I will treat you as a god would treat. And he had them kneel before them, and he showed them his capability in the destruction of their capital city that was almost like a religious shrine world to the Emperor. And of course, the Legion helping him out, the Emperor that is, was the Ultramarines. And the Ultramarines kind of got dragged into this. I don't really feel like Gulliman took any pride, or any of them really took pride in being there. It was kind of like, damn it, why can't you guys get with the program? But imagine now that we have covered Monarchia, that is the hatred and the emptiness and the sadness that Lorgar took with him when he stumbled across the warp. And with that, he would go through and make his dealings and begin the heresy. I think if we could all take a second to imagine the moment the Emperor starts staring across the battlefield at the son he publicly shamed, who now commands half the galaxy in ruin. That is a drama fit for a 40k setting, in my opinion. And that, to me, would be a heresy worth reimagining. But it's not what we got. Instead, in Slaves to Darkness, Lorgar is beaten back by Horus once he's revived at Malachur's sacrifice. And unfortunately, he gets banished for the rest of the crusade. And the one who started the entire Horus Heresy was nowhere to be found in the Siege of Terra. Now, in closing, this is just the beginning. I'll be exploring many more of these ideas here on the Heresy Reignited series, and also talking about lore and everything else. The Horus Heresy and Warhammer 40k are both very full of untapped potential for speculation, alternate outcomes, and honestly just lore-rich discussions. So tell me, do you think Lorgar could have brought low the Emperor where Horus failed? Or was Horus always fated to lead the rebellion and always fated to fail? I think that if Lorgar had realized his potential and stepped up to the plate rather than pulling the strings, we would have a very different 40k setting. Drop a comment, hobby along, and let's keep the conversation going. If you're like me and you still have a few unpainted minis from your Age of Darkness set, let's get them painted up. I'm streaming 8:30 Central Standard Time to midnight, working on Horus Heresy and getting my Sons of Horus up and ready to rock and roll. I've already done a legion and a half of these guys, but I'm getting the rest of my backlog painted up because rumor has it there's some new box set or edition or something dropping, and I want the rest of my stuff painted so I can go into that with an empty conscience. Thank you all for your time and watching this video, and until next time, praise the Warmaster that could have been Lorgar. Peace.